Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask a Farrinarian. I'm Dr. Brian. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a very timely subject, winter laminitis. This is a unique condition and one that our practice sees often, but it doesn't get a ton of recognition. And before you stop the video, because your horse has never had laminitis, I promise this is worth watching because it will help you catch these conditions early. And as a part of that, there's a lot of useful information about how to properly feed and care for your horses as their body systems change in winter. Now, the main factors involved in winter laminitis are metabolic disease, metabolic rate, activity and exercise, and diet. There's a ton of overlap on all four of those, and I'll do my best to break them down for you so you can find the best answer for your situation. Now, we've already made a two-part series on metabolic diseases and a two-part series on laminitis and founder. Please go watch them when this is done. It'll take you 40 minutes total to watch them, and you'll get so much more out of it. In this video, my goal is just to focus on those areas specifically as they pertain to winter laminitis. As a simple overview, there are really two main metabolic diseases of concern: PPID and EMS. Now, I'm going to keep the explanation of these conditions pretty simple in this video and primarily focus on the roles they play in winter laminitis. If you want to know more about them, then be sure to check out those videos on the metabolic diseases. So let's get started. PPID, what is it and why do we care about it more in the winter? PPID is pituitary pars intermedia dysfunction. This disease is also called Cushing's, but this can be confusing because of how often the term Cushing's gets used incorrectly. So for this video, I'm just going to call it PPID. Now, with PPID, horses have an enlarged and overactive pituitary gland. When the pituitary gland becomes dysfunctional and overactive, it incorrectly tells the adrenal glands to produce too much steroid hormone, also called cortisol. Now, cortisol is a stress hormone. When there's too much cortisol for a prolonged period of time, a lot of things can go wrong in the body. Short-term increases in cortisol are normal in moments of stress, but chronic high levels of cortisol are incredibly damaging in the long term. So how does this disease change in the winter? Horses naturally have a predictable change in hormones seasonally as their body shifts its resources to preparing for winter, including growing a thick winter coat. Most horses are fine with it, and they'll have a temporary and mild to moderate increase in cortisol, and then it backs off when the body is sufficiently prepared for winter. A PPID horse whose system is already misfiring and producing too much cortisol goes nuts with the seasonal change, and their levels of cortisol go through the roof. This part of their system is essentially stuck in the on position. This is why they tend to have those abnormally long, thick haircoats, even when they shouldn't. But much more problematic than the haircut is the excess cortisol that wreaks havoc on a lot of tissues, as well as severely limiting the body's ability to repair itself. This tends to manifest itself most critically in the tissue that makes up the hoof and puts them at a terrifyingly high risk of laminitis. Now, let's move on to EMS. What is it and why do we care about it in the winter? EMS stands for equine metabolic syndrome. It's essentially like type 2 diabetes in people. Horses have a chronic intake of more sugar, glucose, than the body can manage with its natural supply of insulin. So how does that happen in the horse? To properly understand that, we have to start with where horses came from. Horses have an ancient metabolic system. They evolved to graze fairly poor quality grass and walk miles and miles all day, every day to find water, and then all the way doing the same thing on the way back. A lot of exercise and a fairly low quality diet was a formative part of their evolution. So as a result, they developed a very fuel efficient metabolic system. And as a result, horses utilize exercise to be how they primarily manage that carbon, sugar, and insulin balance rather than with their pancreas. Now, we as people rely heavily on our intelligent and responsive pancreas and then exercise more if we want to eat more junk. Their pancreas has an operating system millions of years out of date, and it cannot fathom the concept of regular access to nutritious grass and, God forbid, regular meals. So when their pancreas tries to respond to the high sugar intake of the rich hay that we feed them, it does so painfully slow. Our horses now, thankfully, eat like kings year-round, but their bodies can't handle it. As a result of our management, which is a good thing overall, their bodies experience a massive carb and sugar load from the nutritious hay that we give them with really no inherent ability to regulate it well. They try. Oh, they try. Unfortunately, they do it by dumping insulin constantly into the system. So here's why this is such a problem. There's too much glucose and sugar in the body. The horse isn't exercising enough to compensate for their rich diet, and too much insulin being produced as a result. This condition causes severe damage to the small vessels in the body. And unfortunately, much of the hoof is reliant on these many tens of thousands of vessels, and thus is much more susceptible to that damage. Enough damage to enough vessels in the hoof, and we have laminitis. Now, to be clear, and a hugely critical point, this is a year-round risk, but even more severe in the winter. Springtime has its own risks, but that'll be a different video. In winter, their system shifts even further into a hibernation mode. So you take a system that couldn't handle the carb and sugar load on its best day, and you slow that burn rate even more. With EMS horses, the systemic glucose level goes through the roof, insulin follows trying to keep up, and all those key small vessels get severely damaged as a result. And again, we have laminitis. That transitions as well to diet and exercise, and we'll wrap up with how your veterinarian can help. So, great news. Diet and exercise are absolutely critical components of successful management, especially with EMS horses. That falls to you. You don't have to pay me to come out to do either of those, and even if you wanted to, those aren't things I can do for you. It's like a diabetic that won't work out and won't quit eating Twinkies and drinking Cokes. Man, there's only so much that meds can do for you. That trifecta of proper diet, intentional exercise, and targeted medications are critical to success. And these can be really successful cases. We're not talking palliative care or lost causes. Jump on this stuff early, limit the damage and permanent changes to their body, and we can really keep these horses in good shape. Again, another plug, watch the metabolic and laminitis videos where I go more into this stuff. So, key takeaways that anyone can follow. If you live in the West, especially if you live in Colorado, it's an incredibly safe assumption that your horse's diet is too rich in carbohydrates. Hay, whether grass or alfalfa, is typically cut at that peak level of nutrition and, unfortunately, peak available sugar load. Additionally, the nature of the growing seasons and big temperature swings in the West mean that the hay typically available here is across the board higher in sugar than elsewhere in the country. If you do nothing else, assume your horse's hay, just like our diet, has way too much sugar. I don't care if it's Timothy, Orchard, low carb certified, first, second, third cutting, it's too high. And this especially applies to EMS horses and overweight horses in general. So how do we fix this? Extended soaking of hay is one of the absolute best ways to reduce the sugar load in your hay. Now, we go more into that in the metabolic videos, and there's some really good numbers in there. And I know this could be a challenge in the bitterly cold winter, but just like with us, the better we manage our diets year round, the better off our systems are and the more margin we have. A cheat day is fine. A cheat month or a cheat quarter, it's not so much. The lower the carbon sugar load your horse is routinely exposed to, the better they will be through the increased challenges and risks of winter. Because reducing sugar intake is so vital, please do absolutely everything possible to find a way to soak your hay. The biggest challenges in winter typically are keeping your soaking trough or tote from turning into a block of ice, and then when you drain the water, not having a massive ice field in a really inconvenient area. I promise heat lamps and a little planning go a long way for keeping that water and those hoses from freezing. Please don't let those be your excuses. Their lives really do depend on it. Sometimes though, reality sets in, and some days it's just not possible, whether you're out of town or it's just deadly cold. All the more reason to be religious about soaking hay for all the other times of year when you can. Give their system that margin to get through the winter, and especially those couple of brutally cold days or weeks where you're just trying to keep everything alive. Quick pro tip, you can always pre-soak batches of hay right before those cold snaps. I promise your hay won't spoil in those couple of days of -10. It will be very well preserved. This is also a great option if you're going to be out of town. You can always soak a couple small batches and then just let it dry out. Soaking pulls the sugar out, drying it out doesn't put it back in. Now, let's say you're at a boarding facility and you really have no functional say in what gets fed. First off, you're probably not alone, so recruit a gang of fellow crazy horse people and push for change. Otherwise, just get them to feed your horse less through the winter. And importantly, back to you, exercise becomes an even more important tool in your toolbox because you have less control on their diet in your boarding situation. On that note, let's move on to exercise and really overall activity. Like I've talked about already, exercise is a vital component and the literal main way that horses regulate their glucose and insulin balance. They are extremely dependent on exercise to process the sugar component in their diet, and remember, their modern diets are loaded with sugar. Another quick reminder, their overall metabolic rate drops significantly in the winter. What else happens in the winter? Days get shorter, less riding. Days get colder, less riding. Snow and ice, less riding. Also for them, man, they just have less reason to move around in their own day-to-day rhythm. There's no reason to walk to the far end of the pasture. Nothing's growing and it's cold. So they typically hunker down, try to stay warm, and eat all their super nutritious hay. Additionally, again, thankfully, we use blankets and shelter to keep them warm. So their bodies that are programmed to need to work hard against our winters don't even have to do that. Now, this is not me advocating for parking your horse out in the cold with no cover or blankets. There's a host of reasons that horses can easily live to 30 now. Good management pays off. But overall in the winter, their metabolism slows down, their metabolic demands go down, feed intake stays the same or even goes up because, hey, what else is there to do but stay warm and eat yummy carbs? I get that. So in addition to managing diet, which is crucial, exercise and finding ways to stay active is just as important. If it's too cold or too dark to ride, no worries. Just bundle up in normal warm clothes and take them for a hand walk. 15 to 20 minutes a day goes a long way for them and for us. More exercise time is better, but remember, you don't have to be riding them to exercise them safely and appropriate, even in gross winter conditions. I promise their system that is adapted to be reliant on exercise for appropriate metabolic function benefits far more than even we do. It's really good bang for your buck. So, when does winter laminitis actually show up? Now that we've put all that together, there's one last quick point I want to make. Horses can present with winter laminitis at any point from the fall through the spring around here. And that is simply because of all the factors we've gone over and that individual horse's system. Their systems will reach critical mass at different points. For some, as soon as fall hits, cold or not, boom, we'll start seeing them pop up. For others, it takes that cumulative effect all winter long of the big four: lower metabolic demands, lower metabolic rate, lower exercise and activity levels, and the relatively excessive level of carbs and sugar intake. So let's wrap this up with the veterinary management. The biggest tools and resources that I, as your veterinarian, can bring to the table are blood work, targeted medications, and closely followed by being a practice that specializes in feet and lameness. This enables us to quickly recognize and understand the variety of conditions that might be going on, which allows us to start correcting the problems immediately. Blood work, and specifically the metabolic tests, become key diagnostics for us with these conditions. A quick bit on the main medications for these diseases. For PPID horses, there's a prescription medication called Pergolide or Persind that helps put the brakes back on the system to slow and better regulate that production of cortisol. For EMS, there's a prescription medication called levothyroxine, or you might know it as Thyro-L, that essentially speeds up their metabolism and helps them regulate that glucose-insulin balance, and really critically buys us time while we correct their diet and overall lifestyle. Now, whether it's PPID or EMS, or really even just that old horse that's a little suspect, or let's be honest, that chunky monkey of a pony, metabolic testing becomes a vital component of knowing when and what meds to get them on, what adjustments do they need to their dosing. It's rarely a set it and forget it situation. Often we need to test and adjust. And then 3, wonderfully, we get to measure how effective all that absolutely critical work that you're doing is, and if we need to make any adjustments in that vital day-to-day management. There's some good answers, some really good medications, and lots of options that can make a dramatic difference for you and your horse and literally save their lives. Please don't wait on this. Comprehensive, simple management works, but it does need to be comprehensive. My tests and meds are great, but they are painfully inadequate if their lifestyle and feed management sucks. This is truly a team effort, and one that can absolutely be a win. Find a vet who knows these conditions, who knows nutrition, bonus if they actually know feed, and importantly will walk with you as you figure out answers, options, and solutions. Any vet can test. Few will or even can guide you through this. To that end, and shameless plug, if you think we can help you here at AggieVet and Farrier Services, we're pretty good with feet and lameness around here. Please give us a shout. As always, thanks so much for taking some of your valuable time to understand more about these complicated conditions and about how to take care of your horse. If you got something out of it and want to say thanks and help others to find us too, then just do all the things like subscribe, follow, comment, thumbs up. It actually does help tremendously. We have lots of videos on our website and YouTube channel. Check those out too. Thanks again for watching. Talk to you soon.